to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Today, the committee is meeting virtually. Just a couple of reminders to members about the conduct of this hearing. First, members should keep their video feed on as long as they are present in the hearing. Members are responsible for their own microphones. Please also keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. And finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. So good morning. The hearing will come to order. Thank you to our distinguished panel of witnesses for joining our virtual hearing on examining the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program, NIWRP. We've got witnesses from Nist, Fema, and Nsf, and we are so looking forward to hearing their testimony today. I am also speaking to all of you and conducting this hearing virtually from City Hall in the city of Farmington, Michigan, to bring attention to the incessant windstorms that have become more severe and more frequent in my community. As you can see, the city of Farmington was very badly damaged by windstorms that hit in July. The picture below is also windstorms that tore through another one of our communities in White Lake this summer. This was almost a weekly occurrence. I really want to thank our mayor, Sarah Bowman, and our city manager, David Murphy, here in Farmington, along with the entire city council that really banded together. Unfortunately, the citizens in Farmington and across the area have just seen ample evidence and have experienced the destructive power of windstorms. We had a supercell storm that hit here in July. The residents weren't even able to hear the warning. There was no tornado warning or siren that sounded to even go into their basements. Not only were trees knocked over, but trees were damaged and they're shaky, and they continue to pose a risk to residents in their neighborhood. So even despite our advancements, severe windstorms remain the most destructive and costly natural hazards. We had $1 million of damage between the city of Farmington and Farmington Hills. And in Southeast Michigan this summer, we just continued to experience a nonstop deluge of extreme wind and windstorms. We had 9 hard-hitting severe storms in 9 weeks. I'm going to say that again. We had 9 hard-hitting severe storms in 9 weeks: tornadoes, hail, derechos, flash floods, and supercell storms, which I had mentioned, created a cycle of destruction in our communities. And if we can show the map, I would like to just show how badly hit we were here in southeastern Michigan. I share the storm report from August 11th that tracked wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour and prompted the issuance of the Detroit National Weather Service's first destructive severe thunderstorm warning. The storm marked the first time in Detroit that the Weather Service used its destructive storm warning, a new label for the highest category of damage threat. These damaging waves of storms have caused countless power outages and flooded homes. Countless. We're talking power outages ranging from hours to days, to just ensuing over a matter of weeks. People are stressed. They're exhausted from the turmoil. And so with that, in the 2 years since the last Science Committee hearing on NIWRP, my home state of Michigan has experienced 6 severe storm billion-dollar disaster events. No state in our nation is untouched by the damaging physical and emotional impacts of windstorms and associated flooding. Advances in recent decades have led to significant improvements in the National Weather Service's ability to forecast hurricanes, tornadoes, and other storms. However, accurate forecasts alone are not enough to protect lives and property against windstorms and their impacts. I am deeply grateful that we are having this hearing today and a chance to hear from our expert witnesses on additional needs in research, workforce, and infrastructure for improved windstorm and windstorm impact resilience at NIWRP. NIWRP was established in 2004 with three main goals: improving the understanding of windstorms, improving windstorm impact assessment, and reducing windstorm impacts. Atmospheric and engineering research conducted by the program agencies has advanced our understanding of the processes underlying windstorms and their impacts on structures. Post-disaster investigations conducted by program agencies, in particular at Nist, further inform our understanding of the behavior of structures in windstorms. This research has already led to significant improved model building codes. Additionally, disseminate information to the general public on windstorm preparedness and actions that individuals can take to protect themselves and their homes. During a severe windstorm, we certainly need to have all the protections in place. However, it is policymakers and community leaders who truly hold the key to future windstorm resilience through their decision-making regarding mitigation and preparedness. The challenges in preparing for and mitigating against severe windstorms are just far too broad for any one agency to handle on their own. NIWRP's model for interagency collaboration spanning fundamental research to operations has enabled the program to make important advances in saving lives and reducing the economic impact of windstorms. With climate change next, many new challenges lie ahead. Authorization for NIWRP expired in 2017, long before I got to Congress, but the program has committed to its excellent work, and I applaud the agencies for these efforts. As the Science Committee considers the reauthorization of NIWRP, we engage in today's hearing from the agencies on the changes to the program that can continue to improve our nation's resilience to severe windstorms. With that, I'm over time. I'm the chair. I'm going to recognize Mr. Waltz, our ranking member from the nice state of Florida, for an opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens. Hey, good morning. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to our panel for your time to share your expertise on this topic. As the Chairwoman said, it's important across the country. It's particularly important in her state, my home state of Florida. Looking forward to the discussion today. And I'm pleased to see the committee's continued interest in improving our understanding of natural hazards as we continue to our review of the MWRP today. All 50 states are impacted. Windstorms, tornadoes, tropical storms, certainly hurricanes in my state, and flash thunderstorms. And these storms and their associated flooding issues are some of the largest largest loss-producing natural hazards in the U.S. right now. We in Florida are very familiar with extreme weather events in the last 5 years. My home state has been severely impacted by intense hurricane seasons. Hurricane Irma in 17, Hurricane Dorian in 19. Both made landfall in my district, caused over $1 billion in
Mr. Waltz might have frozen. Let's just give him a minute here.
Yes, ma'am. It does appear that his connection has frozen. We'll try to contact his office and see if we can clear that up.
Okay. Okay, great. And then, so why don't we do this? I'll turn to the introduction of our witnesses, buy us some time, talk about these brilliant people who are before us. And then if Mr. Waltz is able to get back on, we'll allow him to reclaim his, 3 minutes, because he does have three minutes left. So our first, let's see. Okay, he's disappeared. Okay. Our first witness is Dr. Scott Weaver. Dr. Weaver is the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program Director at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Nist. Prior to joining Nist in 2018, Dr. Weaver served as the Senior Climate Scientist for the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, and spent several years as a research meteorologist in the Climate Prediction Center at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. He also holds an appointment as an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science at the University of Maryland. Our next witness is Dr. Linda Blevins. Dr. Blevins is the Deputy Assistant Director of the Engineering Directorate at the National Science Foundation, NSF. In this role, she provides leadership and direction to the directorate, which supports research and education that advance sustainability, manufacturing, health, infrastructure, and other national priorities. Prior to joining NSF in 2017, Dr. Blevins served as a senior technical advisor in the Office of the Deputy Director for Science Programs in the Department of Energy's Office of Science. Our final witness is Mr. Michael Grimm. Mr. Grimm is the Assistant Administrator for Risk Management at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Under his direction, the Risk Management Directorate delivers quality risk data modeling and programs that increase the public's awareness of risk across the range of natural hazards. He also directs the National Hazard Mitigation Planning and the Stafford Act and FEMA's actuarial and catastrophic modeling responsibilities. Mr. Grimm has also previously served as the Assistant Administrator for FEMA's Mitigation Directorate and directed FEMA's Individual Assistance Division. I'm going to pause for a minute. Has Mr. Waltz been able to rejoin us? I'm not seeing him. I know we have the full committee ranking member on with us here today, Mr. Frank Lucas, who was not going to be delivering an opening statement, but obviously fairness and bipartisan exchange are very important to this committee. All right. So it doesn't look like we have Mr. Waltz back. So what we'd like to do right now is move into, and our full committee chair, Eddie Bernice Johnson, is at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, so she's not with us either. Certainly an important hearing, though, for today. So what we'd like to do is move into witness testimony. These are really nice testimonies. They've been written up. We're going to get the 5 minutes. Our witnesses are going to get 5 minutes for a spoken testimony. Your written testimony is going to be included in the record for the hearing. When you have completed your spoken testimony, we're going to begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. When we reclaim Mr. Waltz, we're going to add his 3 minutes to his question time. So with that, we're going to start with Dr. Weaver for 5 minutes of questioning. I see you on the screen, Dr. Weaver. You're going to do 5 minutes of a testimony. All right. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the subcommittee. I am Dr. Scott Weaver, Director for the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program, or NWIRP, at the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as Nist. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. NWIRP is an interagency science and engineering-based program focused on achieving major measurable reductions in losses of life and property from windstorms through a coordinated federal effort involving FEMA, Nist, NOAA, and NSF. Since NWIRP's inception in 2004, the program has made notable progress towards efforts to reduce windstorm impacts. This includes significant improvements in hurricane forecasts and increased tornado warning times, advancements in the science of wind mapping to inform engineering-based design standards, improved coordination practices and research support for post-windstorm investigations, and implementation of research-based recommendations into codes, standards, and practices. Despite these achievements, the nation continues to experience increased loss of life and property due to these extreme weather events. Windstorms and associated flooding are the largest loss-producing natural hazards in the U.S. Every state in the country is exposed to windstorm hazards from one or more storm types. Over the last 40 years, windstorms have caused over $1 trillion in economic losses and over 8,000 fatalities in the US. The greatest of these losses are associated with tornadoes and hurricanes. Over the past 10 years, tornadoes have caused an average loss of approximately $10 billion per year. In 2011, 6 different tornado outbreaks affected 16 states and produced a combined damage of $29 billion and 545 fatalities. In a 14-month span from August 2017 through October 2018, 5 major hurricanes made landfall in the US, not including Hurricane Florence, which made landfall as a Category 1 storm, but caused catastrophic inland flooding impacts to the Carolinas from extreme rainfall. The 2020 hurricane season established a new record for most named storms, 12 of which made landfall in the US. The causes underlying these massive and rapidly increasing windstorm losses are many, varied, and complex. Some are related to long-term societal changes, such as the movement of population towards coastal areas of the US. Others relate to changes in storm activity as the result of global climate change, lack of understanding and predictability of surface level storm characteristics and their associated hazards, interactions of these hazards on the built environment, how to mitigate them, and how to effectively communicate with and educate the public and other stakeholders. Advances in recent decades in meteorology and Earth system science have led to great improvements in forecasting and warning systems for hurricanes, tornadoes, and other windstorms. However, large knowledge gaps remain in aspects of windstorm climatology and hazards near the surface. Without additional actions to mitigate windstorm hazards and thereby reduce windstorm risks, losses due to windstorms will only continue to increase. I want to thank this committee for its recognition of the necessary role for the federal government and other organizations in supporting windstorm impact reduction and the resulting creation of NWRP to focus on reducing the loss of life and property from windstorms. To address the challenges discussed previously, in 2018, NWRP released its strategic plan, developed in concert with stakeholders across government, academia, and the private sector. 3 overarching long-term strategic goals have been identified, including the following: improve the understanding of windstorm processes and hazards, improve the understanding of windstorm impacts on communities, and improve the windstorm resilience of communities nationwide. A signature Nist research activity that is emblematic of these 3 strategic goals is the current investigation of the effects of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. The Nist Hurricane Maria study aims to better understand how the buildings and infrastructure failed and how we can prevent such failures in the future. Specifically, the Nist team seeks to understand Hurricane Maria's multi-hazard impacts and the conditions that led to injuries and deaths, how critical buildings and design safe areas within them performed, including their dependence on electricity, water, transportation, and other infrastructure, how emergency communication systems performed and the public's response to such communications, and the impacts to and recovery of selected businesses, hospitals, and schools, as well as the critical social functions they provide. After completion of the Hurricane Maria study, Nist will pursue and track implementation of its recommendations in an effort to reduce windstorm impacts nationwide. NWRP continues to make strides in implementing the strategy put forth in its strategic plan. However, as losses continue to mount, there is much work to be done. We greatly appreciate the efforts of this committee and other members of Congress to support resilience programs that keep the nation safe. I'm pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Weaver. And I see our ranking member Waltz is back. Would you like to finish your opening statement?
Hey, thank you, Chairwoman. I'll submit it for the record. I just wanted to point out that in really a seminal event for Florida was Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which has been some time ago, but it looked like God had taken a lawnmower across the state. 125,000 homes were flattened, and since then, I think our state and local officials have really taken some important steps in improving building codes. And really, if you go to communities now, when they're hit by a storm, you can literally tell which homes were built after 92 and which ones were built before 92 because of those important steps. So I'll submit the rest of it for the record and let our witnesses continue.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And with that, we'll hear from Dr. Blevins next for 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Waltz, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Linda Blevins, and I'm the Deputy Assistant Director of the Engineering Directorate at the National Science Foundation. It is an honor to appear before you today, along with our federal partners, to discuss the important role NSF plays in the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. NSF supports research across all fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and all levels of STEM education. This uniquely positions NSF to facilitate partnerships that bring diverse groups of researchers together with communities, private industry, and others to identify problems and put science, engineering, and technology to work to develop solutions. NSF does this across the entire country, tackling problems at the national, regional, and local levels, and ensuring that Americans from every geographic and demographic background participate in and benefit from NSF investments. For decades, NSF has been fostering research and innovation to improve resilience to natural hazards, including windstorms like hurricanes, tornadoes, and nor'easters. NSF-funded researchers examine the fundamentals of how windstorms form, move, change, and interact with earth, water, and climate forces to improve prediction and risk assessment. They examine the behavior of buildings, infrastructure, and the natural environment in the face of wind forces to enable better designs and mitigation options. And they examine community consequences and human responses to support improved planning and policy, emergency response, risk communication, and decision support. Working alongside our partners at Nist, NOAA, and Fema, NSF harnesses this mindset for NWIRP. We do so through operating state-of-the-art research infrastructure, offering coordinated research programs, supporting the most promising ideas from across the country, and by investing in the development of a diverse workforce that is critical to the future. For example, NSF's Natural Hazards Engineering Research Infrastructure, or NARI, is a national network of experimental facilities that provides researchers access to world-class, unique capabilities. This network includes NARI's Boundary Layer Wind Tunnel at the University of Florida, the Wall of Wind at Florida International University, the Wave Research Laboratory at Oregon State, and a coordination office at Purdue. Through these and other NARI facilities, researchers study everything from hurricane-force winds to tsunamis. NSF's Civic Innovation Challenge is a program where communities and the research enterprise collaborate to address community-identified priorities. Through this program, NSF recently funded projects that will enable the development of rural resilience hubs in Florida and new tools for recovery from storm damage in Virginia's Hampton Roads area. It is vital to support research as natural disasters unfold to record and preserve information that would otherwise be lost and impossible to replicate. NSF's Rapid Response Research Awards, or RAPIDS, do just that. Through RAPID projects, NSF has funded research in the immediate aftermath of several major windstorms, including Hurricanes Florence and Michael in 2018, the Easter Sunday 2020 tornadoes, and the U.S. Midwest 2020 derecho. NSF also funds 7 standing networks called Extreme Event Reconnaissance Networks that are ready to deploy when needed. Extreme weather research relies on basic understanding of weather and climate patterns and trends. NSF investments in climate research span everything from the physical processes that determine hurricane intensity to tornado genesis and tornadic vortex structure. This research improves predictions and helps communities to mitigate and adapt. Looking forward, the facilities, basic research, and researchers supported by NSF will be key to achieving our shared goal of preventing natural hazards, including windstorms, from becoming societal disasters. Investments in new areas like artificial intelligence will provide even better understanding. NSF appreciates Congress's continued support for the agency's mission and its important contributions to critical national priorities like NWIRP. We look forward to continuing to work with the committee and with our partner agencies. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Blevins. With that, we will hear from Mr. Grimm.
Good morning,
Mr.
Chair.
Grimm, are you ready for 5 minutes of testimony?
I am. Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair Stevens, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Michael Grimm, and I am the Assistant Administrator for Risk Management for the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss FEMA's supporting role within the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. FEMA's mission is helping people before, during, and after disasters, mitigating the impact of windstorm damages from events such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and derechos is an important aspect of this responsibility. Although the risk of extreme windstorm varies across the country, no state, tribal nation, locality, or territory is immune. As a result of climate change, natural disasters are more frequent, more intense, and more destructive. In 2020, a powerful derecho swept across the Midwest with hurricane-force winds, impacting communities throughout the region. Earlier this year, Hurricane Ida's wind speeds intensified from 85 to 150 miles per hour in less than 24 hours due to the abnormally warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico. When Ida made landfall, it retained much of its strength as it crossed over 9 states in 4 days, leaving a path of damage from the Gulf Coast to New England. To address the nationwide risk posed by windstorm damages, FEMA is actively working to support the goals of the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program in coordination with our partners, Nist, the Nsf, and NOAA. For example, to improve windstorm safety protection measures, FEMA has issued safe room guidance publications leading to the development of a storm shelter design and construction standard that's used by design professionals across the nation. Nist and FEMA coordinated and submitted dozens of successful change proposals to the standard, thereby increasing the safety and reliability for occupants taking shelter from extreme winds. FEMA also participates in the International Code Council's building code development process to promote the inclusion of wind-resistant provisions. Many of FEMA's proposals to update the building codes are based on mitigation assessment team findings from observations in the field after a wind event. And many of these field activities are conducted in coordination with our partner agencies. These technical field teams study the impact of disasters and compile lessons learned, which can be applied across the nation to other disaster-prone regions. These findings help architects, building officials, and building owners to understand why wind damages happened and to learn how to prevent those damages from reoccurring. One of the most effective ways to safeguard our communities against future natural disasters is to adopt hazard-resistant building codes. These codes help protect people both physically and financially by reducing damages to buildings and minimizing disruptions to daily life. Hazard-resistant building codes are a low-cost, high-impact solution that can help break the cycles of disaster damage and reconstruction. A 2019 study by the National Institute of Building Sciences found that adopting the latest building codes save $11 for every dollar invested. However, about 2/3 of communities across the country have not adopted the latest building codes. As our nation's risks grow, such investments will become even more valuable. In addition, FEMA has other programs and activities that address the risks posed by extreme wind hazards. For example, FEMA provides funding for eligible projects through our hazard mitigation assistance grants. These grants provide our partners with a reliable stream of funding for larger mitigation projects through nationwide grant programs. While FEMA stands ready to respond when disasters occur, we recognize that the true success rests in mitigating the worst impacts of disasters before they happen. At FEMA, a cornerstone of our mitigation efforts is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, also known as BRIC. The BRIC program provides a critical opportunity to invest in more resilient nation, reduce disaster suffering, and lessen future disaster cost. Earlier this year, President Biden visited FEMA to announce that he was increasing the funding available for the BRIC program to $1 billion for the FY21 application period. And this investment will protect lives and property in the face of future storms and being used to support projects which improve wind resilience, such as the construction of community safe rooms and retrofitting facilities. Another important element of FEMA's mitigation effort is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, also known as HMGP. In August, President Biden approved more than $3.46 billion for the HMGP program for the COVID-19 disaster declarations, enabling substantial levels of additional funding to invest in mitigation projects. Mitigation is particularly important for underserved communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In administering our mitigation programs, FEMA will keep equity considerations top of mind and will include them in the competitive scoring process for programs such as BRIC. As we look to the challenges ahead, such as those posed by climate change and severe wind, FEMA looks forward to working with both our interagency program partners and members of this committee to build a more resilient nation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Grimm. And at this point, we're going to turn to our first round of questions. The chair is going to recognize herself for 5 minutes. So, Dr. Weaver, in your testimony, you mentioned that large knowledge gaps remain in aspects of windstorm climatology and hazards near the surface, as well as the development of tools for windstorm impact assessment. Can you address what is needed to help close these gaps and why doing so is so important to mitigating the damaging effects of windstorms?
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's a very important issue right now. I think out in the public, we assume when we're told the wind speeds in a hurricane, that means we know the precise wind speeds and how they're impacting buildings and other infrastructure at the surface. Actually, the opposite is true. We really don't know much about how the surface winds behave, let's say in a landfalling hurricane, for example. Oftentimes, we do not have the requisite observations of the wind and sometimes even the rainfall environment in those storms. And so it poses significant challenges for us to understand precisely what buildings we're experiencing as a hurricane makes landfall. There are efforts, ad hoc efforts led by university scientists. There's some sporadic funding from federal agencies here and there that fund scientists to actually deploy to the storm ahead of its landfall to set up instrumentation or radars and other kinds of observational equipment. But it's not a standardized and well-coordinated program. It's mostly a coalition of the willing. And so we've noticed that when we get those measurements, they are very important for us to understand really what happened at the surface.
And in our 2019 hearing, there was some discussion that barriers still exist and more needs to be done to facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration between the scientists and the engineers supported under NIWRP, obviously something that we're doing here today. But Dr. Blevins, do you anticipate new opportunities for large-scale collaborations on natural hazards resilience under the new Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate at NSF? Has that been discussed yet?
Thank you, Chairwoman. The new directorate, as proposed in the 2022 President's Budget Request for Technology Innovation and Partnerships, will be running a competition referred to as the Regional Innovation Accelerators. That's in the plan, that's described in the budget request. And those will be regional centers, if you will, that are designed to bring people together from across the disciplines, which is where NSF's kind of sweet spot is, bringing folks in from social science as well as engineering, geoscience, et cetera. And they'll be, I think that'll be the type of opportunity that you're thinking of.
Yeah, that's great. And so today's tools, Dr. Weaver, such as field measurements, wind tunnel testing and modeling, and post-disaster surveys generate an enormous amount of data. Do you mind explaining how NIWRP facilitates interdisciplinary research on development and application of methods in artificial intelligence? If there's anything you could touch on there with some of these new technologies and applications, we are all ears.
Sure. So I can't speak directly specifically to artificial intelligence. However, what I can tell you is that so we've developed an interagency post-windstorm coordination plan for hurricane landfall specifically at this point. And we're using that plan, which outlines all the different roles of the various federal agencies that are involved in NWRP. We're using that plan to structure data collection for for housing a central database that collects information on from NOAA on the hazard itself, from the researchers that are out in the field from NSF, from FEMA, from our own deployments, and trying to integrate all that information so that someone who's conducting a post-windstorm investigation can overlay all of the social data with the hazard data and the building data. And there are other efforts out there at FEMA that has this model, does some similar types of things. And so we're looking to use that plan to bolster the data integration for post-windstorm investigations.
Great. And just to hop back to when we were first talking, or my first question here on some of the challenges to addressing research gaps with just the remaining time available, how much do you assume that those are cost related, if at all? I mean, are we talking about insufficient funding here?
So we typically, do the best we can with the resources that we have to, work across the different agencies. Our strategic plan is very comprehensive, and so to be honest, it's a challenge to implement the entire strategic plan. But like I said, we try to prioritize and tackle what we can to the best of our ability.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. With that, my 5 minutes are up, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes of questioning.
All right, thank you. We'll see if the technology holds this time. Hey, Dr. Blevins, the NSF supports, I think as you mentioned, the Wall of Wind experimental facility in Florida International University. It's, as you know, it's capable of simulating Category 5 hurricanes with winds over 150 miles an hour. How is research performed at user facilities like the Wall of Wind? Then how's that research then transferred to industry? How's it transferred to stakeholders to make improvements, to improve the resiliency of buildings and other forms of infrastructure to windstorm hazards?
Thank you. That's a great question. So in facilities like the Wall of Wind or the Boundary Layer Wind Tunnel, we collect a lot of data on different scenarios, and those data are used to develop improved predictive capabilities for windstorms and other types of events. And so through improving those predictive capabilities and our simulations, we're able to actually provide input to those who are developing the codes and standards for the buildings. And so that's the pathway.
I guess, how is it then? I mean, are you seeing it really incorporated? Are you satisfied with how it's used? Do you wish industry would do more? If you had it your way, kind of a thing. I'm just trying to, I understand the great research that's going on. I'm just trying to better understand how it's utilized.
Well, it's interesting that you should mention industry, because also in Florida, we have a relatively new, what we call Industry University Coordination Research Center, IUCRC, Cooperative Research Center. And that particular center is at Florida International. It's called the Center for Wind Hazard and Infrastructure Performance, or WIP. And the way that IUCRC's work is the university scientists and engineers are doing the research, but they have an advisory board that consists of folks from industry. And in this particular one, it's from the construction industry, from the insurance industry, from the risk assessment industry that are sitting on this board. And those folks are actually selecting the basic pre-competitive research that is going to be done by the university researchers. And so in that way, we really are working hand in hand with our stakeholders from industry. And early signs from that IUCRC are that there's some early interest in some uptake from some of what's going on in the research.
Well, that's great to hear, and particularly that the insurance industry is there. I think one of the issues is that we continue to, for a variety of reasons that are probably too complex for my couple of minutes, but for a variety of reasons, we tend to subsidize and reinforce bad behavior in the aftermath of these storms. So that's reassuring, and I'd love to learn more about that facility and who's participating in the uptake. Just in the time I have remaining, for Dr. Weaver, I already mentioned, the 125,000 homes from Hurricane Andrew, what our state and local officials in Florida did to develop stronger building codes. And given that Nist supports research and development to improve model building codes and voluntary consensus standards, best practices, can you elaborate a little bit more on how MWIRP works with standards bodies like the International Code Council and communities to adopt windstorm resilient building codes to avoid widespread losses similar to those from Hurricane Andrew?
Sure. Great question. So Nist does not regulate or develop the actual building code. What Nist's role principally is in developing actionable science that could be used to guide the processes that underpin standards development and code development and implementation. So a great example, not necessarily related to hurricanes at this point, but a very new example is that out of our Joplin, Missouri tornado investigation, one of the recommendations was to develop tornado maps to guide the implementation of safe design for the tornado hazard. Now, this is the first time this is ever being done. Previous to that event, it was just, act of God, you can't design for tornadoes, but now there are provisions that could be voluntarily used to design for tornadoes. And that's going to be coming up in the next American Society of Civil Engineers publication that comes out in 2022 for those guidance. So we work more on the scientific side. I mentioned the measurement science issue with the hazards that occur in extreme, the extreme winds in hurricanes. And we certainly look at that. We are mission assigned by Fema to produce wind maps. We've done it for Hurricane Irma. We've done it for Hurricane Dorian. We were expecting that to make landfall, as you know, as a very strong storm. Luckily, it turned at the last minute. That would have been a significant disaster, of course. And so we're on the front lines of that in many different ways.
Well, thanks so much. And I certainly didn't intend to suggest that Nist would create codes or standards. I think that is rightly at the local level. But I think that's a great example of what you just laid out. And Madam Chairman, looks like I'm over my time, and I yield. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. And with that, we're going to recognize Ms. Ross, Congresswoman from great state of North Carolina, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And this is a very important issue for North Carolina, particularly for our coast, but we've seen more inland tornadoes and other kinds of natural disasters in North Carolina. And we're no stranger to FEMA. So, Mr. Grimm, I wanted to start with you and ask you a few questions. The first question really has to do with the electrical grid, electricity grid, and how it responds to wind events, and wanted to know from you what you think the impact of the new infrastructure package with its funding for upgrading the electric grid and making it more resistant to wind and other weather events, what effect that would have, and whether you think the funding is sufficient.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, with regard to what FEMA can provide in terms of mitigation funding and increasing resilience across many lifelines, including the electrical grid in communities, very, very important. We work with those communities to, I mentioned the BRIC program in particular, that it enables funding for lifelines for, not only for residential and non-residential construction, but also for community lifelines, things like electrical grids or power lines, those sorts of infrastructure projects. So with the recent announcement of the infrastructure bill, of course, we're very excited to have additional resources made available across the government, really to have a government-wide mission and movement to make the nation more resilient, honestly, across multiple natural hazards, whether it's windstorms, floods, earthquakes, you name it. Lifelines are impacted by many different types of natural hazards, and we need to do a better job as a nation addressing the hazards before they happen, not just after they happen. So pre-disaster mitigation is extraordinarily important, and getting ahead of that. Of course, we've shown things like, building codes, for example, that we we're just talking about. For every dollar invested, $11 in return. And likewise on mitigation projects, every dollar invested, $6 in return in general, and across the different hazard areas. So anything we can do to increase our investment ahead of disasters, I think, is a huge step forward.
That's great. You anticipated my second question, which is the potential economic benefits of designing climate resilient businesses. When you talk about $1 invested, this much in return, can you be more granular about where those returns come from?
Sure. So let me expand a little bit more on the building codes. I mentioned the $1 invested is $11 in return. We also just released a codes save study that we demonstrate $132 billion of losses avoided through the adoption of modern building codes through 2040. So $132 billion, that's a huge investment to those losses avoided as we look forward, with climate change. When you look across the natural hazards, whether it's wildfire, flood, wind, or earthquake, there is always a positive return on that investment. For every dollar investment, it ranges from, I don't have the figures right in front of me, but from probably $4 to 11, depending on which, when you're looking at the granular data. We often go in post-disaster and do what are called loss avoidance studies. And we look at those investments we made pre-disaster. So let me give you an example on the wind side of things, where we went in after Hurricane Marilyn in 1995 in the USVI, and we invested hazard mitigation grant dollars. After Harvey, Irma, and Maria, we went back with our interagency partners on what is called the mitigation assessment team to look at those projects and how they performed. And indeed, we found that all the projects that we invested those dollars in performed extraordinarily well, and resulted in that cost savings that you're asking about.
Thank you very much. I see my time's about to expire, but at some point, maybe with one of the other questions that you get, I'd love to hear how you make investments in low-income communities that might not be able to afford some of the more advanced engineering. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much. And with that, Chair is going to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Lucas, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the importance of this hearing also. All of us who live on the east side of the Rockies, on the Great Plains, from Canada to Texas, understand how challenging the weather can be. Dr. Weaver, Dr. Blevins, we've heard about the tornado damage caused in 2011 and how NWERP has changed in leadership and coordination from when the program was last reauthorized. Could you compare where we were a decade ago to where we are now? And what have we done well? And what's the singular area that needs the most improvement or our focus as a committee?
Sure, that's a very interesting question. So NWERP's inception originally, it was led by OSTP. In 2015, it was moved to Nist, as you highlighted, and I think that giving it a permanent home, and also the fact that Nist is more of a user of a lot of the information and is on the ground dealing with the impacts and trying to understand that is a good pull of information from the other agencies, and so the coordination, I think, is going well in that structure. There are several successes that I think we've had. I mean, one is our tropical cyclone coordination plan. That's been very important to guide our activities. We've conducted a couple of investigations in post-windstorms. The Joplin tornado has come up with great recommendations. I mentioned one of those about tornado design earlier in the hearing. We're currently doing a Hurricane Maria investigation, which is very comprehensive and interdisciplinary, and will provide many recommendations for the entire nation, not just for Puerto Rico. As far as challenges go, I think one of the unique things about windstorm hazards is that we're operating in a situation where the climate is not stationary. So with earthquakes, you don't really have much changing. With some other hazards, you don't have much changing. But in the windstorm environment, we have this evolving climate system, and it's really hard to use the historical data to get an accurate portrayal of the risk when things are shifting so quickly. And so I think that's a major challenge for us to try to understand, to stay ahead of that with the building codes. So thank you.
Dr. Bevan?
Yes, thank you very much. I think to me, the challenges that we have are around the sharing of data. We're actually doing a really great job, but around sort of interoperability of data sets and as Dr. Weaver mentioned earlier, the ability for different teams going in from different directions and taking data and being able to coordinate all of that. The NSF sends these teams out. We are able to do rapid grants for people to go out and take data when they're needed. And then we also have these reconnaissance teams that we can send out. And I think just assembling all of the data and making it readily available is a big challenge.
Absolutely. Back to you, Dr. Weaver. Can you please discuss how Nist is working with NOAA to improve the data and methods for tornado hazard mapping and damage modeling through the houses program?
Yeah, sure. So I believe you said with NOAA, right? Was that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sure. Thank you for the clarification. So we serve on a Windspeed estimation committee. We have our engineers that serve with NOAA, and NOAA leads this Windspeed standard estimation committee. And as I mentioned previously, one of our lead investigators from the Joplin, Missouri tornado is very prominent and actively supporting that committee to develop recommendations and to develop science that can be used for national tornado design for infrastructure and for other critical facilities. And so that's principally how we partner with them on the tornadoes.
Dr. Grimm, in the remaining time I have, can you discuss with us, how does FEMA ensure that it meets its workforce demands, especially as the windstorm hazards are increasing in frequency and intensity? How do you get enough people there? Do you have enough people there?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, certainly the amount of work that FEMA has in front of us every year is a tremendous amount of work, whether it's responding to disasters or mitigating disasters or preparing for disasters. We have an outstanding cadre of resources to respond to disasters. Through giving an example, throughout the pandemic, FEMA has had to really change its posture on how we do business. And that is including how we respond to disasters and how we run programs like the Windstorm Impact Program. So across the board, how do we deploy people, find new innovative ways to do things? So for example, we have found, technology enables us to deliver our programs. It also enables us to deliver our disaster assistance. We have programs such as FEMA Corps, groups of young people who are just excited and outstanding, who get out in disasters and help our disaster survivors recover. A wealth of challenge, but a wealth of programs and innovation and being nimble on our feet to get people out to help survivors.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Thank you, Madam Chair. My time's expired.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to recognize Dr. Foster for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Am I audible and visible here?
Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Waltz, and our witnesses for joining us here today and for taking time out from what I presume are your detailed planning on how you're going to invest the funds from the bipartisan infrastructure bill that we sent you last week. Now, my first question involves tornado research. Dr. Blevins, I was particularly interested in your testimony on Nsf Tornado Research. Back on June 20th, a tornado swept through my district in suburban Chicago and caused millions of dollars of damage, and in some cases, complete destruction to homes and properties in my district. Now, fortunately, no lives were lost, in large part because of the timely cell phone warnings that allowed people to seek shelter, often only minutes or seconds before the tornado hit. So constituents in my district don't have to be convinced of the value of detailed and timely micrometeorological forecasts and information. Now, there's a program that's known as the Targeted Observation by Radars and UAS of Supercells, or TORUS, which is designed to increase understanding of storm structures that may be attributed to tornado genesis. But this was paused due to the COVID pandemic. Do you have any knowledge of when it is expected to resume research? Do you know how much data they were able to gather before putting the work on pause? And if any of it has yet been usable by NOAA in the interim?
Thank you for the question. Taurus is a very exciting project, as you state, that is centered at the University of Nebraska that involves a number of other institutions. And I understand that they were originally scheduled to do field campaigns in 2019 and 2020. They were able to do the field campaign in 2019, and I think they paused for 2020 and 2021. And my understanding is that they should pick back up again in 2022. And I think that is when that experiment will be able to get.
Well, how do you generally view the future of this kind of intensive targeted measurements, that follow a storm, compared to just increasing the quality and the density of fixed ground-based measurements?
Oh, I think they're going to become much more important as we move ahead, getting the data sort of in the real world. And I think NSF has a really great mechanism to send teams out to do that through its rapid funding mechanism. We can actually get those. We ask the PIs to justify why they can't get the data any other way other than doing this. And we're able to get those awards out sometimes as quickly as just a couple of days turnaround. And so NSF is really geared up. We also have a facility that's centered out of the University of Washington that we call the Rapid Facility. It's part of NERI, actually. And then we have Converge at the University of Colorado, which pulls together and coordinates the data that comes from the use of the equipment that's provided by the Rapid Facility, our rapid reconnaissance teams, and others, and is able to coordinate it. And so we really are geared up, and we're ready for the increasing importance of getting these kinds of quick turnaround data.
Yeah, well, I look forward to a future where swarms of drones fly into supercells and get really detailed information that allows us to have better predictive models.
Sure.
My next question has to do with, as our witnesses have pointed out, we're not making investments despite the fact that they have a huge return on investment. I think Dr. Grimm mentioned an 11-to-1 return on investments. So it always surprises me when there is an 11-to-1 return on investment and private markets are not making that investment. So do you have any insight as to why markets have failed to address this issue? Why don't the reduction in insurance rates justify paying for these investments ahead of time? And is there anything that government can do to deal with this apparent market failure? Well, this is I guess I kick this to Dr. Grimm since he mentioned the return on investment.
Sure. Thank you. It is a real challenge to get investments in mitigation at all different levels. I emphasize the importance of pre-disaster mitigation programs and getting out there and doing better risk communication so homeowners truly understand their risk. Whether it's from flood or earthquake or wind, a lot of folks think that they may not be at risk because they have an experience event or a loved one has an experience event. So it's really personal, and doing a better job at risk communication across the nation, not just the federal government, but at all levels, and teaming with the private sector. Folks, for example, in the reinsurance arena, very important partner that we have who use data sets that we produce here at FEMA and use data sets, for example, from NOAA and other agencies. We recently put out something called the National Risk Index, and it's very unique. It looks at 18 different natural hazards across the nation. It brings in social vulnerability, and it brings in resilience, and it gives you a risk index at the county and census level. So anybody can type in their address and find out what risks and hazards they may be at risk from, and what actions they could take, what investments they could make. So some of the private sector firms are leveraging our NRI, our National Risk Index, in their risk communications, and just doing a better job and for everybody at the state, local, tribal, territorial level to understand what investments to make, see that return on investment in our pre-disaster mitigation.
All right, thank you. It looks like my time's expired and I yield back.
Yep. And with that, we're going to go to Dr. Baird for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens and Ranking Member Waltz, and also the committee Ranking Member Lucas. And, I always appreciate all the witnesses taking time to be with us and sharing their expertise and their knowledge and background that helps us make a better decision as we discuss legislation. So my first question really goes to all the witnesses. The Natural Hazardous Engineering Research Infrastructure has been rewarded $5 million in funding by the Nsf through 2025. And its network coordinating office is physically located at Purdue University, my alma mater, serving as the administration's headquarters for the program's nationwide network of 11 research facilities. So what I'd like to know is, can each of you speak to the importance of having an integrated approach to these natural disaster research, and then how we might help or what Congress might do regarding these hazard-specific programs and how we can better work together. So with that, I would start with Dr. Weaver.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Baird. So I think, one of the unique things about disasters and studying them is that you need a highly interdisciplinary team. I look at our current investigation of Hurricane Maria, and on that team, you have meteorologists, climate scientists, engineers of different types, social scientists, epidemiologists. And so we have to understand, I think we're so focused on the hazard, and speaking as a meteorologist and climate scientist, that's where I tend to go as well. So I'm kind of guilty of that. We tend to focus on the hazard, which is definitely important, and the changes in hazards are definitely important. But I think we also need a recognition that we really need to be interdisciplinary in our approach, and that's not easy. It's a challenge because we all speak, different languages, if you will, different scientific languages, and so it's truly difficult to do that. So I would like to see more support, however it comes, for interdisciplinary research when it comes to disasters, to nurture that integration.
Well, thank you very much for that perspective. Dr. Blevins, would you care to elaborate on that and the effect of the coordination and the importance of coordination on this research?
Yes, thank you, Representative Baird. I've actually been to the Purdue coordinating office. I'm actually Purdue alumna myself, having my PhD in mechanical engineering from there. So I was able to go in 2019 and visit, and I met the director and the principal investigator, and they gave me a very wonderful presentation on all the great things that they're doing to coordinate all the different kinds of research that we're doing on earthquake, on wind, and on water events across the NERI network. And I think this facility, this piece of the NERI facility really points out and emphasizes the strength of NSF, which is to bring all the disciplines together. We fund basic research across all the different science and engineering disciplines. And one of our 10 big ideas is in increasing convergence research, which is really taking interdisciplinary research up a notch to the next level to really be able to do big things that no discipline could do by itself. So the other thing that I want to point out about that particular location at Purdue is the education and workforce piece. Everything we fund at NSF integrates research with education, but that particular site at Purdue coordinates the research experience for undergraduates program for NERI, and really creates those opportunities for undergraduates to get interested in research in natural disasters. And this is really a field that can really inspire people. In fact, just preparing for this hearing really inspired me, and looking across the breadth of research in this area and just the importance of it for reducing the loss of life and property for the nation. So I think that that's one area where a facility, a site like the Purdue site, can really contribute. The other thing that site does is it really engages in unified sort of outreach to educate the public about the work that's being done. And they can do that across the multiple hazards, which you've already mentioned. And increasingly, these things are actually happening together. And so I think having a coordination office like that is really critical.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that perspective. And Mr. Grimm, I've run out of time, and so I would really like to have had your perspective, but with that, I yield back.
Sounds like a good question for the record, but with that, the chair is going to recognize Congresswoman Wild for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I'm just so glad we're having this hearing. I represent Pennsylvania's 7th District, the greater Lehigh Valley area. For those of you who aren't familiar with the geography of Pennsylvania, it's on the eastern side of the state, about midway between Philadelphia and Scranton. And it's an area that is very, very susceptible to storm-related flooding. We've got 2 rivers that unfortunately almost routinely flood. And, the concept of 100-year floods have now become every couple of year floods in our district. So this is a really timely hearing. And one of the things I wanted to follow up on, Dr. Weaver, with regard, but this is really for anybody who wants to comment on the interdisciplinary aspects of this kind of research. The human element of disaster preparedness and response and recovery is so important. It's become really vital here in my district. And I'd love to hear from any of you how the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program leverages social science research to accomplish the goals of the program to protect life and property.
Sure, I'm happy to start. NWRP writ large, as well as Nist as an agency, I'm speaking for both in some sense. We value social science. In our investigation of Hurricane Maria, we have several social scientists on the team. There are projects that underpin the larger investigation that focus explicitly on social impacts, social and economic impacts. And so we know, as I had just mentioned, that it's not just about hazard levels, right? It's about how people respond to warnings. It's about how people prepare. Were they prepared? What did they do? What were the impacts to them, and what were they thinking? As far as NWRP as a program, it has incorporated social science objectives into its strategic plan. So they're there, they're on paper, there's something that guides our strategy. And then I'll just say, the NWRP agencies, they participate in several workshops that are led by social scientists in the natural hazard space. One I can think of is the Natural Hazard Center out at the University of Colorado. They have an annual workshop, and many of our agencies figure prominently in that workshop. And so we're very very supportive, and it's necessary to bring that into the fold.
Thanks, Dr. Blevins or Mr. Grimm. Did you want to respond further, or should I move on?
I'd like to say something. I just want to mention that the NSF has a whole directorate called the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate, and they're very important partners in this work with us. They look at how people respond to emergency warnings, for example, understanding what motivates or keeps people from preparing their homes or their local environments to be more resilient to storms, and even recently we have a couple of rapids that we've been funding to look at people's attitudes towards, for example, evacuating during the pandemic and going to a shelter when we're having a pandemic, and whether they feel safer in their homes versus in the shelter with a lot of other people, even when measures are being taken in the shelters to socially distance, et cetera. So I think it's very important. And on the flooding part, we also have a federally funded research and development center called the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR, that's helping develop NOAA's water model, which is very critical to predicting flooding events.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Another question that I have in a kind of different direction for any witness that would like to answer, but I'm going to expedite my question since my time's running out. What would it take to design buildings that are optimized for resilience to multiple hazards? And how might that approach be further integrated into approaches related to energy efficiency? And Mr. Grimm, I haven't heard from you yet. You want to take that one for us?
Sure, absolutely. When we work together across the interagency, we absolutely look at codes in an all hazards way. Energy efficiency is an aspect that can be further developed within the many codes, but looking across the different natural hazards, and pick a region, right? You could be, as you pointed out, your area is subject to flooding, to wind hazards, to other hazards, and working with those communities to adopt and not change the code that they adopt, right? To adopt the full code from the most recent set of codes, and not remove specific hazards from those, so that we do have a comprehensive code. It's one of the last questions, previous questions, talked about the gaps in the data and understanding that data and how we improve the codes as we move through the code cycles. We all work together, not just in the wind space, but also in the flood space and in other hazards within the interagency, and advocate for those codes. But getting the data and understanding that data, translating it into what code improvements need to be made. I think Dr. Weaver pointed out a number of improvements that as an interagency we've worked on in the code series, particularly around the research in wind. We mentioned Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Marilyn in the USVI, Harvey, Irma, Maria, as well, resulted in certain code changes. And likewise, we'll be working in the multi-hazard space to ensure the codes are addressing multi-hazard for those areas and those geographies.
Thank you so much. With that, my time is up, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And with that, the chair is going to recognize Congressman Gonzalez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this important hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for sharing their expertise. As our witnesses have described, the negative effects windstorms have on all our communities is all too evident. While they vary based on region, in my home state of Ohio, tornadoes and storms off Lake Erie have caused great injury, certainly property destruction, and even death in recent years. I don't remember that happening as much as a kid. It just feels like it's happening more and more often, and I believe the data is starting to bear that out. Dr. Blevins, I want to start with you because you noted the use of AI has already had a significant impact on addressing the research needs of pressing environmental concerns. I want you to dive deep on that for me. So how do you see AI playing a role in tracking future windstorms, and what does that technology look like today?
Thank you. Despite 18 months of this, I still can't find the unmute button. Thanks for the question. So we have a program called the AI Research Institutes program. It's a major program. It's a flagship program that we've been running for the last couple of years at the foundation. And this creates big coalitions of folks, different kinds of researchers, different kinds of institutions coming together to collaborate. An important one of these is it's called AI2ES, and this is AI for environmental science. And this is actually out of the University of Oklahoma, is the lead institution, but of course there are many institutions involved. And this is really aiming to take the tools of machine learning and artificial intelligence and tell us more about what's going on with these types of storms, windstorms being one of them, and one of those types. And so I think that the community is, this community, disaster resilience research community, is very excited about bringing these tools, artificial intelligence, machine learning online. I think it's going to help to take some of the routine determinations and work out of it, and the artificial intelligence can be used, and the machine learning by training the models can be used for us to be able to get to the harder parts that require the human intelligence to intervene that much more efficiently. So I think it has great potential, and the community is very excited about it. So I thank you for that question.
Yeah, and then what, if anything, should we be thinking about to help the research community leverage AI even more in this area? Is there something we can do from a data standpoint, or I don't know? I guess I'll just turn it over to you. What else can we do to improve that?
Well, I think part of the issue with using machine learning is having good data sets that are well defined, they're clean, they have well defined metadata and assumptions that you can make about the data sets. And so I think that the kinds of facilities that we have through NCAR and through NARI and through Nist and Fema, all of us working together to get those data sets as clean as possible and to constantly improve them, new measurement techniques, new ways of deploying them in the field. I think anything we can do to make the data better is going to make that technology really shine in making an impact on this problem.
And then staying with you, and I know I only have just a few seconds, but in your testimony, you highlight the importance of supporting and preserving research as natural disasters unfold.
Yes.
Could you go into detail of how strengthened interagency coordination could result in a more holistic and efficient federal response in gathering research for windstorms?
Well, I think we have a hub that's called Design Safe, right? That's operated, it's led out of the University of Texas, and it really brings together a lot of different types of infrastructure, or cyber infrastructure, to make that happen. And so that's my
Okay, sounds good. Well, I see my time is almost up, so with that, I will yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, all our members for their questions, and obviously our witnesses for today's critical hearing on NIWRP and what is obviously much needed in leading to its reauthorization. The purpose of today's hearing was to review the activities of NIWRP, including the importance of interagency collaboration, which is no easy feat, but obviously we've got some of the best here and a lot of tremendous expertise. And so the committee's going to clearly continue to consider new and evolving challenges to improve windstorm and windstorm impact resilience and opportunities to improve this program, the NIWRP program. And certainly as we think about our large country and how every state is impacted by windstorms and has a need for resilience, we also want to evaluate who has access to Farmington, certainly needing the FEMA dollars and the aftermath of the windstorm, but that we had earlier this summer. We also think about low-income communities and low-income residents in our communities, and who signs up and who gets access to resources for resiliency, specifically as a couple of my colleagues were talking about insurance and access to insurance and the dollars for that. So we're going to continue to work on this. Certainly the next phase is going to be, our markup and our ability to reauthorize this program. I, as chair, really want to get there with this. And so the record's going to remain open for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks officially, for additional questions or statements from members that they may ask of our witnesses. But at this time, our witnesses are excused. Our virtual hearing is now adjourned.